I'm going to talk about Fraser Island, one of the potential sites we might use as a case study. And probably when I talk about Fraser, I start talking about climate change because it's the result of climate change. But to start with, I'll let you know where it is. It's down in the southern hemisphere, obviously, about 250 kilometres, and I'm not going to do the translation into miles, north of the capital, Brisbane. But to give you an idea of scale, you might have heard of Cairns. So it's about 1,700 kilometres to Cairns. You need a good 24 hours to drive there, and that's partly because of our roads rather than anything else. But big country, and the park is not small at all in terms of an island. We're trying to do some comparison. This isn't a mine's bigger than yours exercise. It's just trying to give you some sort of context here. We're much smaller than Yellowstone, but not a bad size island, seeing it's all made of sand. Our visitor numbers are very small by comparison, but that doesn't mean they have no impact at all. In fact, in many ways, because of the nature of the island, they may be having more of an impact than what's happening in Yellowstone. Quite a few vascular plants, but we would consider that Fraser Island is quite poor in vegetation diversity. It's an island, fully made of sand, so therefore the plants that have colonised and occupy have to live in specific low nutrient conditions. So it's not a good site for growing plants at all. Although they did try to grow forestry plants, trees on their way back, but they weren't successful. But some large trees, nevertheless. Our fauna, of course, is interesting. That's a gliding possum. Compared to Yellowstone, given the size of the area, we're doing pretty well. And one of our iconic species, of course, is the ones down the bottom, the dingo. To get renowned for chomping on people every now and then. Used to be thought to be related to the domestic dog, but more closer to the white-footed Asian wolf, South Asian wolf. So quite an interesting little animal. Important in terms of Fraser, because it was an island, this is the purest breed of dingo that's still left in Australia, so important from that point of view. And of course possums, but as I said, relatively Fraser Island is poor in species diversity, including the mammals, but not so much in terms of birds. We've got quite a few there, and of course this is all related to where Fraser Island lies in the world, but more importantly I guess is the nature of the plants that we've got. High nectar, plants with nectar in them, there, so we have a lot of nectivores in our bird species, but not only those, of course. How am I going? Reptiles and amphibians. I was stunned when I looked this up that Yellowstone had so few. Relatively, we've got quite a lot of these. Friendly ones and unfriendly ones. The eastern brown snake there would probably be number 2 in the world's list of most venomous snakes. Regularly visit my place, and my dog loves to grab them and bring them to me. So far that I know, it's brown snakes nil, but nearly got the dog. Jack Russell 3. So, and we're talking about snakes about this big. I think he's going to die of them before too long. That is a dunny bowl, a toilet bowl. Prime habitat for the green tree frog. Wonderful when you go to the toilet on Fraser, you sit down and they either jump up on your bum, but they're more exciting when you flush the toilet and they all start scrambling, coming out from underneath the rim. The frogs are interesting on Fraser Island. Highly acid waters, and the acid in the water is so high that the frogs have adapted. They find the gut contents is less acid than what's outside, so they lay the eggs and actually eat them and brood them inside their gut. So quite a fascinating little things with these acid brooding frogs, and of course they're unique to the island and the other sand areas of nearby coastal areas. So after that, let's get to what Fraser Island's about. And as I said, to understand Fraser, you need to understand climate change. And going back, and this is replicated in many places around the world, but certainly vital for Fraser Island, is this sea level rise and drop over the last 500,000 years. Without this, we wouldn't have Fraser Island. So it's the dropping of the sea level that allowed sand coming up the east coast of Australia from the Antarctic to build up off southeast Queensland, and with some rocks providing an anchor, allowed the sand to accumulate. As the colder periods occurred, the sea level went down, winds increased, dunes piled up over dunes, and eventually you have Fraser Island and all of the sand behind it. Very attractive features, the dunes, these are the sand blows. But the point is, right at the moment, these aren't active. Yes, they're moving slightly forward, but with climate change, it's likely that these will increase because with every 1 degree of temperature rise, we get an increase in wind, and these might be on the move again. Occupying, you can see what's happening here. If I can use this thing. This is being colonised by the dune moving forward across the island. And if you think about what's happened in the past, that's been the process, dune overtopping vegetation. And this creates an interesting mosaic with the water. So the oldest dunes are on the west coast of the island. I've laid this on its side, so north is that way. And the younger dunes on the east coast. And as I said, pushing in with the prevailing winds. And if you have a look at this, where the sand is going, it's coming from the south, building up and depositing along the southeast coast of Queensland. And as it gets pushed further, it runs into the elements of the Great Barrier Reef and runs off over the side of the continental shelf. So it's going in there and creating some sandstones for the future. But of course, what will happen in the future if we get sea level rise, increased winds, increased tidal current shifts, then that loss of that sand over the side could increase, and we might see a lot of the island going over the edge of the continental shelf. It's a World Heritage Area, and one of the key values that it was set aside for was the water, the lakes. Lots of lakes on the island, and if you think, how can you have lakes on sand? Because the sand is very porous, of course. Well, that's one of the remarkable things about the place, and relates to that process of the dunes overtopping dunes that had vegetation on it. So here's something trying to indicate what's going on. So on sand, fresh water from the rain entering the dune system, filtering down, of course, the salt water is acting as a basin underneath. So we have this lens of fresh water that goes across the island. And across the island it rises in the middle to the higher dunes, and where the water table cuts, is exposed, you get a lake, a window into the water table. But we get this other strange thing happening. So we have this layer of peat type substance that creates a semi-permeable layer, and as a result the water sits perched above the water table. The implications of that in terms of the protection required for those lakes is, of course, quite significant because they're unique, isolate little systems. The third system is an advancing dune, and it cuts a depression, so we get this barrage, a little dam created, and we get another type of lake. Usually they're quite deep. Now, what happens with the water becomes significant for some of the work that I've been doing is it comes out to the coast, which is not on the picture, a little swamp here, but then it flows out over the beach. So we've got water coming into the sand mass, gradually percolating and ending up flowing out on the beach in quite significant volumes. So you drive across the sand at Fraser Island and you're running across fresh water. I'll come back to that.